Hello, it is that time again. That time being more or less 10 in the morning, a little bit late today, on Friday. So, as the title says, relaxing painting with Dyson Dungeons. There will actually be a tiny bit of painting today, maybe more, depending on how things go. So I'm continuing to work on the Apollo, and it's this thing. Okay. And as I've said, like in every stream lately, I've got the escape tower completed. I've got the service module completed, except that this part keeps falling off, and I might decide to re-cement it at some point. I'm not sure. I'll probably decide that when I show it off again. I've got the lunar module, the ascent stage, which is this bit, and the descent stage, which is the gold foil wrap bit underneath this. I've got these parts for the fairing, the compartment that holds the LEM. Those are all painted and ready for assembly, and they're not being assembled because I don't have any place to store it once it's assembled. Those are really large pieces, and when they're laying flat, I can keep them in a box over there. There's a box full of those parts. Find it. Oh, I moved it. Yep, moved things around. Can't find them anymore. Anyway, the only thing that's left is the command module, and that's what I'm working on now. And I will explain why I'm not going to be able to finish it anytime soon when I start explaining why I can't finish it anytime soon. I'm going to get really close to finishing it today, except for the parts that I can't finish, because I want them to. I want to try something to make them look more realistic. This is the inside, it's upside down, of the shell of the command module. And these bits are the instrument panel pieces that surround the astronauts when they're inside the capsule. And those are the reasons why I'm not going to be able to finish this, because, oh, if you can see there, the simulation of the instrument panel is very, very lightly embossed on the surface of this piece. This is the main piece of the instrument panel that goes above here, which is also a very important piece of the instrument panel. And one approach would be to attempt to paint those little details, which I think in theory could potentially be done. Another option is to just do it the way the model maker said, and that's leave it the way it is, which is not very good. And the third option, which I'm going to be attempting along with our DM Alexis, is this is what the instrument panel is supposed to look like. Okay. So if you look at the very light embossing on this, you can see there's some similarities, some slight similarities between the thing that they made for the model and the reality here, but not very many. What we're going to attempt to do is what the model maker should have done. What the model maker should have done was included decals of this or something like it to be applied to the instrument panels. Not having those, what we are going to try to do, and I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, we'll find out, is use pictures like this of the real Apollo instrument panel and use something like Photoshop or whatever to get them to fit here. Okay. and then print them on, print them really, really well, fine detail on decent paper, and then apply them to the model's components. That is that's what we're thinking about doing. So that we end up with instrument panels that will be barely visible through the open hatch and the tiny little windows in the command module. And I don't know how long this is going to take. We haven't even started on it, other than having printed out one to see that this is what it's supposed to look like. So the final assembly of this is going to wait until we find out if this is going to work or not. If it works, wonderful, then we'll have nice instrument panels. And if it doesn't work, then I'm not sure. I think then I'll try to paint some of the detail on here, or at least highlight the detail that is embossed in some fashion. We'll find out. But that I'm trying to explain the delay in completion of the model. Other than that, there isn't too much left, and I'll be showing you that in a bit as I pull out the pieces. This is the parachute container. And this is almost done. It needs some touch-up with this color, this darker color, in a few places where the brown got onto it where it shouldn't have. And then I'm going to use some wash to wash the brown so that it looks a little bit more interesting, so that some of the contours and things are more visible. And what is this? Dirt? So spot that didn't get painted. Anyway, every time I look at something, I find flaws that I didn't find when I was actually doing work. Oh yeah, I need to do touch up with this color, because I painted the shroud lines, the parachute lines on, in many places I got it onto where the brown is. So touch up with the color, the brown, touch up with the dark aluminum in a few places here and there, including the top where it's supposed to be a uniform color and it just got all swirly for a reason. Okay. And then wash. So that'll be sort of like painting, right? And then this gets unmasked. I get to unmask this today. And then remask it. I painted the inside. Now I need to paint the outside. And the outside gets painted sort of a pearlescent white that you will see in a minute when I show you the other pieces. So I'm going to take this off of this. I attached it to this little piece of cardboard when I spray painted it so that it didn't go flying around. Excuse me. It's been that way. I guess I'm just going to go ahead and take the tape off since it's in my hands. If the blue paint had gotten onto the surfaces where I don't want it, I can scrape it off. I can't have any of that blue paint on the surfaces that are going to be white because the white paint is sort of translucent and the flaws would show through. Anyway, a bunch of tape is coming off. Pretty exciting stuff, huh? Watching tape go off. Maybe it'll come off. So the masking of the inside is going to be a little easier on the bottom because I just need to tape it off. I need to make sure I tape these openings so that the white paint doesn't get inside through these holes I spray it. And then the top will be a little more complicated. And I have to tape it from the inside rim here because the top of this is going to be painted white. There. You get to see me get tape all over my fingers. See how this goes. I'm going to do the remasking a little bit later in the stream. I'm going to finish the parachute bit first. Actually, after I'm done unmasking this, I'm going to bring the box of parts over so that you can see the parts that I'm working with. So far, it looks like this went okay. I'm going to be really kind of sleepy today. There isn't any coffee this morning. I didn't have time to make a pot between when I got going and the start of the stream. Okay, there's some paint that leaked there. To clean that off a little bit, it would leave a shadow. I don't know if you can really see it. I'll show it to you when I start cleaning it. So for the most part, this looks good. There's just a couple of spots. There's a spot right here that I'm going to just try to sand off just a little bit. Just in a difficult spot. Okay. I'm just seeing a flaw in the window frame, I think, but I'm not sure to test that. So when I retape this, I'm going to be taping the insides of the windows so that the window frames themselves will be painted that kind of pearlescent white. Okay, might be a little darker because of the paint that's on there. I knew that was going to happen, but that should be okay. What I'm seeing is like there's some excess plastic there. It's really hard to see. It's just a little bit of a unevenness in the edge. Okay, so what's going to happen here is that the insides of the hatch and the windows, I'll tape those. And if I forget to tape those, that will be a problem. So I want to do those first. Then I will just tape the bottom. Okay, way around and cover it. I'll probably use cheap painter's tape for that because this edge isn't going to be seen, so I can just tape it across. Trim the edges so that the tape doesn't climb up on the sides, you know. Like sometimes if it extends over the edge too much, it folds up and then covers a spot. And then on the top here, I need to run the tape around the inside of this, because that part right there, that part of the ridge needs to be blue, and the top of this needs to be white, and the in between doesn't need to be anything at all, because that's where this gets cemented. Right? And once the outside is painted, then I can attach this like this. And there are 3 other things that need to be done. One is I want to fill in that gap where the alignment pin is. One option is to just paint it the same color so it's less obvious. The other is to try to fill it in so that it's even all around. And I think I'm going to try to do that. Another thing is that the windows need to be applied, and the windows are cut out of thin, transparent material. And I've been using takeout container box tops. At least I did. The material that came with the model, there wasn't very much of it. And so I didn't want to use it up because sometimes things don't fit. And it turned out that they didn't fit. And it was good that I didn't use it because I would have wasted it. So instead, I wasted material from carry-out box tops, which was relatively easy to replace. Here's some. Okay, that's it. So the windows get cut out of that and then applied in a way that hopefully sticks. And then the door needs to be attached, and it's supposed to be pin hinged, and I tested it a little bit and it doesn't really work. So I'm either going to break what is it? This another one of those. One of 3 things can happen, right? Either the pins break, and I can repair them, or the pins break, I can't repair them, and I just have to cement the door in place, or it works and the hatch opens and closes. And I don't know which of those will happen, but at some point in the not too distant future, I'll be finding out. Just finding more molding flaws, just places where this thing was very badly done. Parts didn't fit very well in this model. I'm going to get this stuff sort of out of the way and bring over my box of parts. Okay, parts. Little astronaut guys get to sit in little astronaut couches. They are very unrealistic, and they actually end up being suspended above the floor, suspended above the floor of the command module like that. And then there's a space behind the couches for storage and maneuverment. These bits, these instrument panel bits that I'm going to put in the box so that they don't get scratched up and messed up. get assembled around here, and they surround the couches. And then eventually this thing gets attached. This is the last thing that gets done, is that the shell of the command module gets attached to the heat shield and covers up the whole thing poorly. It doesn't fit. I can't make it fit. There's nothing I can do to make it fit. So it's going to go on as well as I can get it. Then there's this little bit here. There was a gap there. I filled it in because if that were the real Apollo, that would be a disaster if that were open. At some point, this little bit here will be painted the same color as the heat shield. So this is how it will go together, and then you'll be able to look in the hatch, if the hatch opens, and see the inside, the detail on the floor, and the instrument panel, which will be about where my finger is. Okay, so that's going to go there. Here's the hatch, painted pearlescent on the outside already. Windows in, you can see the window. And on the inside, I painted the frame of the window because the real hatch had a brown frame around the window. So I kind of did that. And then there's a little bit of detail, but not very much, showing the locking mechanisms and the hinge. It's the best the modeler makers decided to do, and so I did the best I could to highlight the parts that they managed to show on the outside of this. And then, after the parachute thing is on, this covers that, goes on like that. The escape tower goes in where these pins are, and then another one goes on top of it. And that's how it looks until it's launched and the escape tower disappears. This goes off. The airlock and hatch that attach to the lunar module extends beyond this a little bit. Lunar module gets attached to that. When it comes back to Earth, the lunar module is discarded, and this stays on until it has gone through the atmosphere and the parachutes are ready to go. And then this comes off the parachute bit, which is here. It was discarded. Poof, exposing that. The parachutes open up and it lands safely. Yay! So here are the bits that are done. This bit needs to be taped. This bit needs to be finished. Oh yeah, and here's a walking on the moon astronaut guy. I thought I did a pretty decent job of painting this, including all the moon dust on its legs. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like there's that much to it, but the instrument panel not having a decal and not being able to easily paint the detail is the thing that's holding up this whole construction. Yeah, so the thing I'm going to do next is to fix the flaws in this with the paints that are used for those different colors. I've got a teeny brush, my little touch-up brush here, and I'll put on my head magnifiers and start fixing it. And then the final thing will be to put on some umber wash to make these parachute covers a little less dull looking, I guess. We'll call it that. Other thing, I'll save it. It's like, what am I going to do with the rest of the time during this stream and even next week? And the answer is I have some idea what to do at the time yet this stream, but I don't know what's going to happen next week. We'll find out. These are pretty good head magnifiers. The magnifying lens goes here, and you didn't hear it because the microphone filters out extraneous sounds, but you might notice that there's no magnifier on it. I noticed that too when it fell off and dropped onto the floor. Fortunately, I have these are made out of plastic and not glass, and I have rubber mats on the floor as a cushion, and so it didn't break. Yeah, so these are pretty good, except it doesn't, the grip there isn't the grippiest. The paint to stir. Get a little rave effect going here as the little vortex spinner thing shakes up the bottle of paint. Oh yeah, as I'm looking at this, I'll just digress a little bit. On the outside of the command module, these little divots, can you see those little things? I do believe those are supposed to be attitude control rockets. Here and here, here and here, all around. If they are, they probably should be painted black, okay? Because if those are rocket nozzle jets, they're not going to be white. I am going to, how will I know this? I guess I'll look up some pictures of the command module. It's in the Smithsonian. They have pictures online to see whether they're black or not. And then I can also look at the box top to see how they painted this. That's a detail that I may or may not end up doing. I prefer not to, because that creates a great opportunity to make a mess that would be difficult to fix. Here I am painting. I'm going to be doing some painting, relaxing painting with Dyson Dungeons. Get to see all the flaws, including little spots that didn't get covered with paint when I painted the brown before. I had gone silent. What to talk about today? I've used up just about everything I can think of in terms of a monologue. I've talked about the destruction of several industries that we never think about, but they actually are fairly large components of our economy back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The destruction of the TV antenna industry. Total obliteration. What were doubtless thousands, maybe tens of thousands of jobs when people didn't have TV antennas on their roofs anymore. I talked about the destruction of the vacuum tube industry when transistors became ubiquitous. That's a good word, isn't it? But this wasn't an extinction event, but it certainly was a significant event. And that's the car muffler industry. Because it used to be that car mufflers, in fact, most of the exhaust system, did not last very long. It was almost, but not quite, well, I guess almost in many cases, sort of an annual ritual to replace the muffler. There were at least 2 nationwide muffler replacement franchises. I think Midas Muffler is the one that people might actually remember. I think they're still around, but their business is not what it used to be. Mufflers last so much longer now. As I said, it didn't eliminate the industry. People still have to replace mufflers and exhaust pipes and catalytic converters and that sort of thing. But it's not like it used to be when you'd go to the Midas Muffler shop. You didn't need an appointment. You just waited around with everybody else and you got a new muffler. Even in, recent history, changes in technology just wiped out things. It kind of surprises me is that, now so many of these kinds of changes become politicized. Nobody politicized the vacuum tube industry or the TV antenna industry or the muffler replacement industry. We didn't have protests and marches and politicians railing about how we need to not have transistors. We didn't have an anti-transistor movement, even though the transistors were killing. It really was job killing, even though transistors were killing thousands, maybe tens of thousands of jobs. And so I wonder, what's the difference? I don't want to get into politics too much, but I wonder sometimes what's the difference between a change that has a huge impact on employment. What's the difference between one that becomes an event and one that just happens? I find that kind of puzzling. Sometimes it becomes a big to-do, and sometimes it just doesn't. To remember all of the people who lost their jobs because of transistors, cable television. Well, this is looking... Yeah, I would put that away a little too prematurely. I'm finding infinitesimally small little spots. Excuse me. Okay, whatever's left will not be able to be seen under normal viewing conditions. I'm being forced to reminisce about the things I used to talk about. Mr. Ed, bad rhymes in theme songs, Flintstones versus the Jetsons. As I'm drawing to a close on the Apollo here, and having to do a retrospective on the things I talked about while I was building the Apollo and the submarine. I'm trying to fix this. This is the top of the airlock and hatch that goes into the lunar excursion module, and it's, as you can see, the mix of pigment and metallic particles in this paint just swirled around. It's not a uniform color. So I'm going to put some more of it on. Can't really use a very big brush because the spaces are... And I'm going to try to get the paint really well mixed up. And brush it so it's even. And it's not a bad color. It's just that it isn't even on the surface. It's not uniform. Use a paper towel to open this. Sometimes it spatters. Okay, well, I'm just going to brush it on here and see what happens. I'm going to fill the well, so to speak. Actually, I think what's happening here is that I have too much paint. Just the opposite of what one might expect, is there's too much paint on there. And I'm just going to brush it off. And because it's very liquid, it just swirls around. Just like in the well here, the components separate from each other. So I thought the way to fix this would be, put a lot of paint on it. But it was just the opposite. The way to fix this is to have very little paint on it. It's too much. It separates. So this is kind of working. Looks much better than it did. And if it stays much better than it did, then I can say, oh, I'm done with this. And at some point, I need to just stop messing. That's I reach that point. The point of not messing with it anymore. What? That is a flaw in the plastic. I can't get rid of it now without redoing the entire thing, I suppose. Okay, so this is ready for the washing, which is the brushing on a brownish, very, very thin paint onto the brown surfaces. And thinking this umber wash would be good, but there might be a little too much pigment in it. The dark brown would be better. What I should do is test it. I mean, I really should just test it to see. And that will take some time, but that's okay. I do have time. The way I'm going to test it is I'm going to take this brown paint that is still sitting there and hasn't dried in the well yet and paint a patch of it. And after this dries, which won't take too terribly long, I will get both the brown and the umber wash and see which one looks better. There, test patch. We can all sit now and watch paint dry. Or I can start masking, and maybe that's what I'll do, is start masking the command module thing there. So I can paint the outside. Put this on a holder. Use the holder instead of my fingers while I put the wash on. It gives me more maneuverability. All right. I remembered that I needed to mask the windows on the inside. Something like that. That's a good thing. Learning how to use scissors again. Apparently, I'd forgotten. Okay. Well, I was going to cut this in half, But then the two, each half would probably be a little too small. So why not just use this whole bit and tape it up? Doesn't really hurt to have too much tape on it. Other than that, it uses up the tape more quickly. But I can get more tape, right? Right. And talk about more aerospace stuff. I did spend a couple of streams just talking about my experiences of growing up during the space race when this thing was happening. I was it started in about 1957, so it was like the space race thing. So it started out while I was in elementary school, and then the moon landing was when I was in high school. So I got to be on the ground floor of the space race there. Mm-hmm. What I remember most was how serious it was. How getting, well, part of it was missiles were developed not necessarily to get into space, but most of the missile development was to get nuclear warheads onto your enemy's lands. And so rockets became more and more powerful. Missiles, I guess, rocket missiles, whatever. There's a difference. I think there's a difference, and I can't remember what it was now. So I'm going to just be incompetent in terms of my description. The missiles that were developed to get warheads ever further and more accurately launched. So I got to watch the birth of the first ones were intermediate range ballistic missiles, IRBMs. That was popularized mainly after ICBMs came on, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Before that, they were just missiles, right? But then once you had ICBMs, we all had to learn these distinctions. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, that was a missile that could carry a warhead all the way from the US to the Soviet Union. Okay, those were the only continents that anybody really cared about. Nobody particularly cared about anything else other than, back and forth between the US and the Soviet Union, because we were the two that had the nukes. China had a few later, but initially missiles couldn't go that entire distance. We didn't. So we had these missiles like Thor and Jupiter. Not Jupiter. Yeah. Oh, Redstone. It was Redstone. Sorry. Yeah. The Redstone rocket and the Thor rocket were, as it turned out, intermediate range ballistic missiles because we had to station them in order to hit the Soviet Union. We had to station them in places close to the Soviet Union, right? I mean, couldn't hit it from here, so it had to be closer. So we would station them like in Turkey, or Western Europe. And sometimes we didn't even acknowledge they were there, but, which was kind of weird, I have to say, the being secret about where your missiles are. You knew very well that you were just keeping the secrets from yourself. I mean, to be honest, that's what we were doing, because it would be foolish to assume that the Soviets didn't know where our missiles were and we didn't know where their missiles were. That's why we had things like the U-2 spy plane, and later on the SR-71, before we had spy satellites that were routinely taking pictures. But most of our information probably wasn't really coming from these satellites. It was probably just coming from people who were telling, because there were always people who knew what was going on, and somebody would say something anyway. That's a whole different thing, is what was secret and what wasn't, and from whom were we keeping secrets, or were they keeping secrets. I'm just trying to get the tape kind of tight up against the edges of these hatches. Okay. I'm going to tape this first and then the bottom, because as I'm thinking about this, I might want to reach up from the inside, and if I tape the bottom, then I can't reach up, right? Right. See how this goes. Probably made that a little too big. Well, I'll put it on and see how it happens. Anyway, growing up then doesn't need to be that, need to end up covering that whole thing. Let me stick this on. I'll see how this ends up going. Being kind of an aerospace geek back in elementary school and all the way through high school, I kept track of the names of the missiles, at least ours. It wasn't that easy to, we didn't go out of our way at that time, the government or anybody else, publish information about the Soviets' missiles and planes. So I learned about Thor and Redstone. Those were really kind of amazing how primitive those things were and how small. But they served the purpose in that they could carry a miniaturized nuclear warhead to the place that you wanted to blow up. They were liquid fueled, right? Having that tape extend, that's just really a waste of tape. We'll see how. Which means that they couldn't be launched quickly, right? You had to have all the liquid oxygen and your fuel sitting there in separate tanks, just sitting there waiting to be loaded on, and the liquid oxygen had to be replenished with some frequency because it would sublimate away. So they were not exactly the kinds of things that would be a secret launch. You couldn't get away with just like, oh, I'm going to do a sneak nuclear attack on you with these missiles, because they just were not those kinds of missiles. They were, as it turned out, not even powerful enough to send an itty-bitty little satellite into orbit. So that was a big part of the space race, was military missiles. So the big advances came when the intercontinental ballistic missiles were created, and we all had to have our favorite missile. when the Atlas rocket came out, that was a really big deal because it was powerful enough to send a nuclear warhead all the way from like Wyoming across the top of it was the shortest route was across the top of the Arctic pretty much, and hit Moscow. We were all very happy about that because then we could, we were able to hit Moscow now. That was a cool thing. That also was liquid fueled. So these earlier missiles, like the Thor and the Redstone, I think the Redstone was actually a Army rocket. There was still, the different services were still making efforts to keep their own space forces. Just try to close this in. Putting some pieces of paper, attaching it to the tape that's sticking out. Seems to be a way this is a way to do that. Maybe not a very good way, but it is a way. Yeah, so the IRBMs gave way to the ICBMs. We got all excited about them because, they could do these cool things, like deliver warheads all the way across the world. Well, yeah, that's how the different branches of the service all got involved, because IRBMs, had limited range. In some ways, they were considered to be like a close support weapon, and I do believe that the Redstone was an Army rocket. The Thor was an Air Force rocket, and it wasn't until we got ICBMs that the Strategic Air Command, the one that flew the B-36s and later on B-47s and B-52s, that's a whole other story of nuclear warhead delivery stuff. It's a gap there, right? Way under there somehow. You can see it from one direction only. So I'm looking in. If I'm spray painting this, there, it could come in. See that little opening there, into which I am unable to apply tape. I've discovered with just about every adhesive that I have used, it sticks to where I don't want it and doesn't to where I do. Like it's sticking to my finger, but not, and it's really sticking to my finger and not to where I wanted to put it. And then I want it to stick to itself. And for some reason, this blue tape just does a really poor job of sticking to itself. So anyway, yes, Army had some, Air Force had some. They were intermediate. The ICBMs came out. I imagine that there was all sorts of political bickering and bribing and cajoling and lobbying and who knows what to decide who got the ICBMs. Whether it be the Air Force or whether the Army or even the Navy. The Navy at this point was being shut out of it a lot. They had ships. So you couldn't put these big missiles on the ships back then. And we didn't didn't have cruise missiles yet that could be launched from their jets that were carrier capable. So yeah, there was that. Being in grade school, I wasn't privy to all of these sorts of things, but looking back, I can imagine that this was happening. I do remember, though, that when it came time to put a satellite into orbit, this is another part of the space race, right? The first part of the space race was getting into space. So the ICBM actually launched its warhead into space. It was a ballistic missile, meaning that it was unguided. It was like a shell from a cannon. Once it was shot off, it was just ballistic. It just went where it was going to go. Its fate had been determined at the time of launch. So these things went up into space, but then came back down, right? I mean, they didn't stay there because that would have missed the point. Well, actually not. There was a whole controversy about whether you could keep weapons in space or not, but that was settled fairly early on when everybody got afraid enough of that they decided not to station weapons in space so that they could just be launched from space. But yeah, so the ICBMs were capable of getting something above the atmosphere, and then it re-entered. So at that point, it became possible. It became possible to, well, actually before that, I misspoke. The ICBMs could do that, but the idea of putting something into orbit came way before that, because the first launches into orbit were in the U.S. were not made with ICBMs. But I think at this point, this is where in the U.S. the kind of rivalry among the services really came out, in that the Army, which had the Redstone rocket, and Wernher von Braun, the famous rocket scientist guy from Germany, said, well, we can put something into orbit like right now. And it's like, well, how can you do that? And it says, well, we've already got this Redstone rocket that can get mostly there. And now we can do these things called stages, which we can put a rocket on top of a rocket on top of a rocket. And then it, becomes more powerful, because you can send something up on one stage and then the next stage lights up, and I'm just getting rid of the extra tape because it's going to be nothing more than a danger. But whoever was deciding where the money went said, no, we're going to make a rocket, a brand new rocket, that just isn't a military rocket, at least not yet. That's just going to send stuff into orbit. And that's how the Vanguard program got started. And you should look the Vanguard program up, because it's got all sorts of really good rocket blow up stuff. The Vanguard rocket blew up on the launch pad or near the launch pad almost all the time. It was a huge failure. It was a pretty cool looking rocket. It was very sleek, pointy kind of rocket. It was really quite nice, but it didn't work. And then the Soviets launched Sputnik, And then we got all panicky. Hours that bee went and said, "Hey, Mr. von Braun, are you serious? You can launch a satellite using your rockets?" And well, yeah, I've been waiting for you to ask. Of course I can do that. And so they put stages on top of a redstone. I think there were actually 4 stages. There were a lot of rockets on top of rockets in order to get it, because the redstone wasn't that hugely powerful a rocket. And it couldn't send anything into orbit on its own, really. Nothing of consequential weight, anyway. So they reconfigured one of the Jupiters to have multiple stages and called it one of the redstones and called it a Jupiter. Jupiter C. Why C? I don't know. I'm sure there was some sort of reason for it. There's the walking on the moon suit. They cleaned it up for the display in the Smithsonian. It was all covered with moon dust. And it sort of looks like the one from the model. It kind of had a camera on it, that kind of stuff. So we got to launch a satellite that way. That worked. I think it was a long delay. Felt like forever. But, the Soviets had a satellite up and we kept blowing up Vanguards, it was really cool to watch, but probably really frustrating for the people trying to get the satellite into orbit. They'd show it on TV. The Vanguard would, it'd light up, and one of them just sort of tipped over, boom, blow up. Another one, as I remember, lifted up maybe 10 feet and then came back down and blew up. The blowing up stuff was pretty impressive blowing up stuff, but it wasn't very, very good at getting a satellite into orbit. But the Jupiter C did. And then we got to brag, even though we were late doing it, we got to brag because Sputnik, all it did was beep. It just sent a radio signal back. Which was enough to make everybody jealous, because even amateur radio operators could listen to the Sputnik beep. It was very shameful having all that beeping going on in orbit. It wasn't our beeping. But we were very, very proud of Explorer 1 because it did more than beep. It actually carried an experiment. And as we have all come to learn, we discovered the Van Allen radiation belts with that satellite because it got up high enough to find out that they were there. And that was an important discovery because, we thought maybe they'd be there, but to have it confirmed was cool. And it turns out that those belts are really important because basically it's radiation that's captured above the Earth so that it doesn't come down and kill us. So we eventually got our satellite up into orbit. Eventually, the Vanguard actually worked. They kept spending money on it. And it worked and sent some stuff into orbit. But then we wanted to send bigger stuff into orbit. And about that time, the military said, okay, you can use our ICBMs. And so the Atlas rocket became a satellite delivery thing. There, I remember I don't know why they did this. It had no practical purpose, but they put an entire Atlas rocket. It was just a one-stage rocket into orbit. I still remember the number. It was Atlas 10B. And the entire Atlas, the entire one-stage rocket went up into orbit. And I think it was Eisenhower, who was still president at the time, sent a message back from 10B. That's all it did, is the rocket carcass was in orbit, and it sent a radio message saying, "Hi, I'm broadcasting from an Atlas rocket that's in orbit." It isn't what it really was, but it might as well have been. We all got excited about that. Atlas rockets in orbit. And eventually it stopped being in orbit and came back down to Earth, but as most of these things do. But yeah, they started putting a second stage on the Atlas rocket, Atlas Agena and things like that, and those were able to launch pretty big satellites, and that's how we were able to get spy satellites into orbit, because we had this kind of launch vehicle. Okay, well, this is taped up now. I'm just going over it to make sure I'm not missing anything. And then this is going to be painted that pearlescent white color. Be spray painting this. And then I have to decide whether these dots have to be black or not. What I would really like, this is wishful thinking here, is I would like to have little adhesive dots, little adhesive circles, just that size. And I could paint these black and then cover them. But I don't have those. I don't have those. I'm going to tape this down onto the cardboard. Some bits of this. And I like doing this because too small. I like doing this because then when I spray paint it, it doesn't go flying around. It stays. I need to put it on the edge, obviously. It doesn't stick to the middle. There. It stays. And if I spray it, it doesn't go flying around, which is what I want it not to do. So, masking. I did masking. This thing's ready to be washed now. Let me get the tape out of the way. Now put this out of the way. Put that out of the way. Putting things out of the way is a good thing. I don't do that. Oh, no, it's not ready for washing. Duh. I have to do my test. Remember the patch I did? I was going to test the brown versus umber wash. Which I would do. No, there's the brown one. It was the umber one. Both of these, that's smoky ink. So both of these have been sitting around a good long time. You can see here how the pigment has separated from the solvent. We need to give them a major stirring. But we got all excited when our satellite went into orbit and it came back and it discovered something. It made a real scientific discovery, so we could be proud of ourselves that it did more than just beep. So that was pretty cool. But then, of course, we fell behind again. And part of it was this interdepartmental, the Army and the Air Force and the Navy were all doing battle. If I recall correctly, the Vanguard program was actually sponsored and run by the Navy, which didn't have a ballistic missile program, but the Air Force was getting the ICBMs, taking off the Army because they wanted some. And the Army had the Redstone, the intermediate range ballistic missiles. And so the Navy needed something, but then I think it became kind of a quasi-civilian thing through NASA or its predecessor. I'm a little fuzzy about that. I don't remember that part because, the interwar department feuds those were not things that were, published that much. Walter Cronkite didn't talk about those. All we knew was that the Vanguards blew up. And von Braun's contraption, its 4-stage missile, actually worked. So once again, he became heroic and got to work on the Saturn program, the giant moon launching rocket. Okay, so that's the Umberwash. But then it came time to shoot people into orbit, And this was a time when space exploration started to become a big, exciting thing. Everybody, you could go to the bookstore and get all sorts of picture books about space exploration and how we were going to set up bases on the moon and Mars, and has space stations where you could go as a tourist. Nobody knew any better, right? But it was possible at that point. So space exploration, manned space exploration, became a big thing, a real popular thing. And it had to be a popular thing in this country, at least, because tax money was being spent on it. And if it was unpopular, then the people spending the tax money on it would have been booted out of office and replaced by people who wouldn't spend tax money on it. Right? So the popularity of all of this was really important. It was, who knows? I mean, it might have been really popular. It might have been a propaganda effort. Who can ever tell the difference, right? But anyway, yeah, there are all sorts of space exploration books. And it all went back even to like the 20s and 30s and 40s with Tom Corbett and various radio shows and things like that. So it wasn't anything new. What was new was that it started looking like it was possible. Yeah, I'm going to be using brown. I like this kind of reddish color better. Okay, so that test was a success in that I could compare the two, and I decided on one. So I'm going to apply this very sparingly because I can always put on more. but taking it off is difficult. And it's kind of a subtle change in appearance, but I think you can see that what happens with the wash is that the texture, a lot of the texture that's molding in becomes much more obvious. So I shouldn't have said that. It was like a propaganda effort. The space exploration had become like a big deal kind of thing, science fiction-y thing that everybody wanted to do many, many decades before it actually became possible. But suddenly it became possible. And not only was it possible, but we had a nuclear-armed adversary that we wanted to destroy each other, right? That was what we were all about. So it became who was going to get there first. And what would they do with it if they got there first? Would it be a really dangerous thing? The real concern was military concern, not so much having a base on the moon as would it be an existential threat to our country, and vice versa. So it added some urgency to it. Anyway, we each found out each other that we were trying to get somebody into orbit. And again, we were embarrassed because the Soviets got there first. So we got the Mercury program running. The Mercury program became possible because we had ICBMs, one of which was like the Atlas rocket that I talked about. And we knew that the Atlas rocket was powerful enough to put something into orbit because it had put itself into orbit, which was, pretty impressive. And it could do that without stages. Like the Jupiter rocket had many stages. The problem with stages, especially early on, was that the technology was really kind of new. And when you pile one rocket on top of another rocket, it increased the possibility of a failure because each rocket now could fail. Instead of having one rocket that could fail, you might have 3 or 4. And the whole process of think about it, the next stage has to come off the stage below it, right? You can't just sit there. It has to come off in order to work. So you had to have a whole mechanism of ability to separate stages and to do that at precisely the right time, and then start the rocket engine on the next stage. So if you just launch a rocket, which is not a simple thing, but launching one rocket is a lot simpler than, say, launching 3. And so if you just launch an Atlas, say that was like a trivial thing, but you're just launching one and you're igniting the rocket engines down here on Earth at the launching pad, and it just goes, right? But if you put a stage on top of that, then that stage needs to separate from the stage below it. And then that rocket motor needs to start up, and it needs to start up remotely. And it's not just sitting still, it's moving at maybe 5,000 miles an hour, and it might be 20 miles up in the air, moving away from you, away from your control station and stuff. So when you think about it, it's not a trivial thing to put a stage on top of a rocket and have it operate, because lot of that either has to happen autonomously or you have to have really good radio communication with it. So that's when, we learned about, separating stages, and it was a kind of a big deal. See how much nicer that looks now with the wash on it? I think that came out really quite well. It changed the color and it highlights some of the detail without it being too obtrusive. And because this is an Apollo thing, I'm not going to wash the rest of this. Often use the wash to make things look worn or weathered or something like that. Well, this isn't. This is a pristine rocket. So I just wanted to change the appearance of the covering on parachutes, the parachute shrouds, or whatever they're called, packs. And the top of that came out okay after I brushed away all the excess paint. It's not great, but it's, in the B territory. All right. Some of this stuff out of the way. So when we were kids, the stages started happening. We were just, the only thing we knew about was what showed up on TV and what they reported, but there were always specials about the rockets. And one of the special things about them was that the stages separated. And the way they did it was with this really amazingly cool thing called explosive bolts. I remember being a kid and we said, explosive bolts. Yeah, my dad goes, yeah, they got explosive bolts. That's how they separate the stages. When they go up and you want one to go away from the other, you want it bolted on when it launches. You want it to be on there really tight and not fall off, right? You don't want it to fall apart during launch, but then you want it to separate. So they bolted the second stage to the first and the third stage to the second. But the bolts somehow contained an explosive material that could be detonated with a radio signal. And when it did, it blew up. And if it happened, I don't know. I mean, thinking about it, that was a pretty good trick because they had to blow up with enough force to make sure that the bolts separated. You didn't want any residual boltiness stuck in the holes, keeping the parts from separating. But on the other hand, you didn't want to damage anything with the explosion either. But anyway, we got all excited about the exploding bolt technology, which was an essential thing in staging of a rocket. Thing that I remember that was a cool thing at the time. Okay, well, here's parts, and it doesn't look like much. The parts are all fairly large. The detail is painted on them where there is detail. Okay, the astronauts are not attached to their little couches, but they're sitting there all sort of comfy, cozy in their the astronaut seats. The door actually came out pretty well. I'm very surprised that I was able to get not only a circle but the frame painted on it, and it looks okay. It's not perfect. There's just rough edges all around it, but from this distance, as I say, you can't get any closer than 18 inches to this when it's being viewed. It looks all right. But I can't finish this until I either succeed or fail at getting these instrument panel appliques done. What I will be doing is painting the pearlescent white, and after that's painted over the weekend, I'll be able to attach the windows. And so there's still some Apollo stuff that I can do on Monday, which is to, once the outside is painted, I can untape all of this and get the windows in. I don't want to put the windows in until the outside is painted, because I don't want to have to do what I did with the LEM, which is mask the windows before painting. That was an interesting process. And then I'll try to attach the door without breaking anything. But this is the very last thing. It goes on top of this after all of this is installed. And it just sits on top of it. So there, that's it. That's all I can do with the Apollo command module today. I'm going to keep this out so that I remember to paint it. So what else is there to do? Let me put my glasses on. So if the instrument panels had come with decals, I'd be applying those decals today and finishing this on Monday after this was painted and the windows and doors were installed. But since it didn't, as I've said over and over, I'm going to try to make it look okay, you know, a little bit more authentic by creating our own version of instrument panel appliques. I've got all these little bits of paper towel floating around here. We need to do, but isn't much. I'll just leave this out so you can see something that's related to the Apollo. And this will be, let me put this out too. There's the Apollo. While I'm talking about stuff, you can look at that. It's better than looking just at a piece of cardboard. So the other thing I can work on, and this is kind of an interesting part of the model, is it came with a stand, came with two stands really. This stand, this size of the circle. Oh, what is all that about? I primed this. Wow. I primed this yesterday, and it apparently touched something, and it's got stuff stuck to the paint. There, that's something I can do, is I can try to clean this off. There, I mean, all this stuff stuck to the paint. Why? I don't know. Just to be annoying, maybe. Anyway, this stand, this circle, is the size of the fairing that I talked about that holds this thing here. This diameter on the bottom fits over this. And this is supposed to then be the stand. If one stacked all of these things up, it would stand on here, and this would hold it in place so that it didn't fall apart immediately. It's also supposed to be ocean. I don't, when this thing lands, comes down with its parachutes, it would have been cool if this model came with parachutes. Wouldn't it? I mean, even if they were like plastic, like formed plastic domes, kind of. 3 big parachutes that attached to the parachute thing. Anyway, when this splashes down, it's supposed to be ocean. It's supposed to land on here, but then there's this that isn't ocean. So I don't know. It might be a good stand for the entire rocket stack, but it's not a very good simulation of landing in the ocean. I have to sand this off. These things, whatever they are, they're really gross and stuck on there. I might have to reprime this edge depending on what I decide to do in terms of painting this. And I don't know. I'm not really tempted to paint the ocean waves on it. That might be fun to try. I'm not sure. But right now it's not very enticing. What is getting rid of these dark spots. And they're being really persistent. There's the plastic underneath is white. So those should just sand off, and there should be white plastic underneath. Well, I didn't plan to do this, but it's a way to fill some time. But the next thing I'm going to show you is actually is kind of cool. And so what I might end up doing on Monday is working on it. I'm just going to have to reprime that if I end up using this. I'm not sure how I'm going to paint it. I've got this hideous bright blue color. I might use that. But this thing is cool. So the thing stacks on here before it goes off the launch, and theoretically, at least, the command module splashes down on here. But the LEM lands on the moon, right? And so they gave us this very much non-moon-like thing. It's an exaggeration of the moon. And this is where the LEM lands, and it made its own crater, right, with debris fields all around it and all these other little craters. So I have gray primer as well as white primer. I thought, well, the moon is pretty gray. So that's the base coat of the moon thing. And there's some spots here that didn't get painted very well. So one thing I can do is I can try to make this look more moony. So I went online and I said, well, we all know kind of what the moon looks like. That isn't really it. But, craters, if the sun's coming from an angle, have these shadows on the inside, where the sun shines on it and it creates a shadow. And then there's a lighter highlight where the sun hits the opposite side of the crater. So in this case, the sun is shining that way. And so you get these shadows this way and the bright rims that way. And so this was a pretty good example of it. And then I, not wanting just one, I think that's another one. And this is a little bit more, the sun's at a shallower angle here. So the shadows inside are deeper into the crater. But again, you can see how that works, where there's a really dark shadow on the sunlit side. Again, it's coming from right to left. It's always right to left. And then the lighter highlight. I have several different, I have some black colors and some lighter grays. And I think I'm going to try to do this. I am right-handed, okay? And so if I'm going to be painting a shadow inside of a crater, I'm going to paint it on this side. And so on this particular thing, the sun is going to be shining in this direction, like that, so that the dark shadows are here. and the highlight is there. And then there's little bits too, like, there's this thing here, so that this would cast a shadow there, and then it would be brighter there. And like this bit would cast a shadow and be brighter on top. This could take forever to do. So, why not do relaxing painting with Dyson Dungeons? Painting shadows on craters, and there's a lot of craters. This one has a very high edge, and so it would be a deep shadow, right? And then the edge would be very bright. So yeah, there. Moonscape painting. Could turn it over. There. Now it's the bottom of the moon, but the sun is coming from this direction. So yeah, I got moon pictures here and a moonscape thing, and it's not going to look like the real thing because it isn't starting out looking like the real thing at all. But we'll see how it goes, and if it goes okay, that'd be great. And if it doesn't go okay, then I can just reprime it and start over. So there's the thing that I found in the box that I can work on next week, is painting moonscapes. I'm going to do something different today. There's nobody in chat, okay, and I'm not sure if anyone will show up or not. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go until about 12:30 and then just end early, because I don't have that much else to work on right now. I've got, the moonscape. I can actually, maybe I'll start on that just to see what happens, since I've talked about it. And then this is going to be spray painted, and I can't do anything with this until Monday when I'm done, when I install the windows and the doors. And everything else will be off screen. I can't show you the process of trying to come up with appliques for the instrument panels. So I'm going to just show you how this, I'm going to just take some time now to show you how this model works. And maybe next week, if I'm brave, I'll get all the pieces out of the boxes. I'll get the pieces out of the boxes and show them to you to prove that they're real. So these are all the components, and everything is complete except these are not hinged yet. They're unhinged. And this is the thing that I'm working on. And I keep saying this, the command module is one of the smallest components of this entire thing. It's even smaller than the lunar module, but it's where the astronauts spend almost all of their time. So these things stack up, and it looks like this, but they're not cemented together, which is kind of a fun thing. They're not cemented together. And so once this is all put together, one can simulate the entire Apollo mission with the model. Okay, and that's kind of a cool thing. The first thing that happens, this is all launched on the Saturn V. There's 3 stages. It's put into orbit, and then the third stage fires up again and shoots it off to the moon, right? This all gets shot off to the moon. And so what happens first is that the escape tower is discarded, because once one is safely in orbit, it's not needed anymore, and it's just in the way. And at the same time, this little cover, the very tip of the nose cone, is jettisoned so that the airlock and hatch is exposed. And that's important, because what happens then is that the service module and the command module component detach from this, the housing or fairing for the lunar module, this opens up. I'm not sure it opens up quite like this. I don't know if that's accurate or not. If I don't recall if it had like a pedal function or not. But anyway, this goes up and turns around and comes back and docks with the lunar module. That's why docking was a really important thing to practice during the Gemini missions, is, connecting two spacecraft together in orbit. And that happens. It had to go up. The attitude control jets turned at 180 degrees, and it attached to the lunar module and then pulled it out. And then the housing for the lunar module was discarded, and the lunar module then was attached like this. And this is the rocket then that the lunar insertion rocket, the retro rocket that fired to put it into orbit around the moon. And then the lunar module, the two astronauts climbed through this tiny little tunnel into the lunar module, this part here, that looks like an insect that was originally called the bug, but then became the LEM. And then the thing landed on the moon. The model itself, this part of the model down here, was really difficult to build because these are tiny little plastic bits, fragile, they're brittle, and they're hinged. They actually do fold up. I folded them and unfolded them twice, and I don't want to do it again because I'm afraid I'll break it. But while it's in the in its housing like this, the legs are folded up, and then they unfold for the landing on the moon. And you can see it landed on the moon, and the moon looks just like that. How it lands. And then the little walking on the moon astronaut guy, just one of them. They didn't make two, even though two astronauts walked on the moon. Only one gets to do that in this model. Gets to stand around outside the LEM. And then the LEM is made up of two parts. And the rocket motor here, that basically all this lower part is a rocket motor. And the legs, okay, that gets left behind, and then the top part launches back and reattaches to the command module like that. And this is pretty cool. It's wrapped in gold foil, as are these legs and the landing pads, but it gets to stay behind. The other thing that was really cool about this is that it had a variable thrust engine. It's throttled, so it could produce more or less thrust. And that was a huge engineering breakthrough at the time, because most rocket motors just either fired or didn't fire, and you controlled how much thrust it was produced by changing the amount of time that it fired. But this, because you wanted to land, you had to have variable thrust. Like you wanted it a lot of thrust to slow it down, and then a little bit when it landed, and you wanted to shut it off. So that was this module here was really a shockingly good piece of engineering. And then one of the reasons the lunar module is big like this compared to the command module is that it has a rocket engine in it as well. It's a very important rocket engine because it's what launches it off the moon. And if it didn't work, then they'd be stuck on the moon. So the rocket engine inside the ascent stage of the lunar module everything was critical, but this one was really critical because it had to work, and it launched. One of the later missions, Apollo 16 maybe, 17, they actually set up a camera that could show it being launched. And it was really weird because there's hardly any gravity. So you're used to rockets launching, they start out really slow, just barely creeping up as the first stage is propelling pretty much just the fuel for the first stage. But this popped off. It just went boom, just like that. You should check it out if you can find a YouTube of the launch of the ascent stage of the lunar module from the moon. It's very odd looking. Anyway, when it gets back to Earth, they throw away the LEM, right? And then this rocket fires again, and to slow it down as it's approaching the Earth to get it in its right attitude, the right place, so that it can land, doesn't skip off the atmosphere or hit too deep or something. And then they throw that away. And then this bit here is the only thing that's left. And that's when that white cone comes off and the parachute things I was working on parachute it down. So, yeah. And the model does that. All the pieces come apart. I can pretty much guarantee that they will not stack pretty like this. They're not going to all fit together. And in fact, this is kind of an impossible view with these two doors open, because that means that this entire thing, the service module, the command module, and the escape tower are balancing on a semicircle. And that isn't going to happen. So this photograph is very misleading in that one cannot display it this way unless these are somehow attached. I don't know. Maybe they cemented them on. Maybe they're just glued on in the back. Maybe they're just taped on temporarily. I'm not sure. But I'm not going to, one cannot display it this way. Probably can have one of these leaves down so you can see the lunar module inside, so that there's 3/4 of a circle supporting all of this, but a semicircle. It would just tip over and fall, and then pieces would break, and then everyone would be very sad. So there's that. And then I've got moon that I can use, that I can paint shadows on and do highlights. And then I've got this that has a little bit more to do. And what I need to do is find out if these little dimples here are, in fact, rocket nozzles. Pretty sure they are. And so if they need to paint it blacker. I'm going to get up for just a second to stretch my legs, but also take a look at the box top, which I'm not going to bring. Oh, well, yeah, I could. I could bring the box top over. I don't have too much stacked on it. This is the thing in color. Beyond belief, master modeler put this together. And these dimples are not painted black. Now, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be. Okay. I am going to try to find a picture of the real unit, of the real command module, to see whether or not those are, but so far they're not, which is a good thing, because I would just as soon not have to do that. My model actually looks, it's not too bad. It can't, I think, we look at kind of the detail of the model that was good enough to put on a picture. Mine came out okay. I'd say it's like on a grading scale of A through F. I think I managed to get a B. Yeah. So next week, I'm going to be painting the moon, working on this a little bit, talking about how I haven't made any progress at all on getting appliques for the instrument panels for the command module. And then the next thing I'm going to build, because this might not be finished, I'm not sure when. I'll come back when the appliques are done. Either they failed or succeeded, one way or the other. This will get finished, and I'll show you all the parts. But the thing I'm going to work on next, and there's going to be a next, is the Savoya S21. And those of you who see any kind of anime ever will recognize this as Porco Rosso's plane. And one of the members of Dyson Dungeons found this for me. I mean, just that there is a model of this at all is pretty amazing, but it's also 1/48th scale, which is the scale that if I build airplane models, and I've got dozens of them here, they're all 1/48th scale. Yeah, it is. The cover is written all in Italian because Porco Rosso was, right? But the model itself is Japanese. And so the instructions for the minifig, I might end up, I'll be spending some time getting Porco Rosso looking right. Well, like most models, there's all sorts of delicate bits here, right? The instructions are in Japanese. It says it's 1/100th scale. The box is 1/48. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? They are all in Japanese. The painting instructions are, it shows different variations of the model. There's a picture of all the parts. But as far as I can tell, the pictures are helpful. If I can identify parts, then I can assemble them. The cool thing about this model too is that it is actually a cutaway, kind of like the submarine. Hi, Who? No, I didn't do a flip yet. You're coming in just in time to hear me talk about maybe ending early. Anyway, this is a cutaway model in that the detail on the inside, the whole, the body of the plane lifts away from the bottom. So all of this stuff here is interior detail, like the fuel tank and the cockpit, including the machine guns, the framework holding the body together, Porco Rosso's seat and steering yoke, all of those are visible. You can see here by lifting this off, the interior, some of the interior detail is visible. Yeah, there. So this will be interesting to do. It even comes with a little carriage. This is a seaplane, but if you want to take it off from land, you have to put it on a carriage. So this is a really good model. It's really cool, and it'll be a challenge to paint. Let me just say, there's two Porco Rossos. One sits inside the plane and the other one stands outside. There's a really comprehensive color chart here. See that? And it's in Japanese, and I don't know, maybe I can get a translate program to tell me what colors they're supposed to be. And they're those are part numbers. I don't know. I'm just sort of baffled by all of this. It's just going to be kind of an interesting project to try to put this together. I do know, though, that the plane itself is red and the bottom is sort of tannish brown. So I guess other than Porco's costume itself, Yeah, this is helpful. I mean, it's helpful to have a picture like this because the painting instructions are challenging. But I'm going to do my best with this and try to make it, work my way through it as well as I can. I'll probably actually be starting on this next week because, unless I take forever to play around with this moon base, and why not? This is what has to happen next until I get the instrument panels going. So I'm really looking forward to doing this. At the same time, I'm a little bit anxious. I don't want to mess it up. But yeah, we'll give it a go. Hopefully it'll turn out well. I'm going to need to get the right spray paints. I'm relegated to using spray paints instead of airbrush because unless in the next week I learn, not relearn, because I never did learn, unless I learn how to use an airbrush really well. That's how I'm going to have to be painting things. So let's see, flip. We're going to do a flip on the moon here. We scar up the paint. 2 of each. 3 sears. 4 to 2. It's just sear. Okay. That's all it is. Sear or not sear. So hi-ho. What I'm going to be doing today is kind of just ending early. Because I have to spray paint this and I have to do something that I don't know how to do to get the instrument panel looking good. Yeah, that. So let's see. I'm gonna mess around just a little bit yet. I got like 20 minutes. I'm gonna find out what painting shadows in the craters is going to be like. I think I can use this brush. I'm gonna try. It'd be nice if I had something in between this and the really fine one. See what I've got. Here where those went. I had a couple of decent brushes. This one, I'm going to try this. The bristles are stiff. Okay, well, I haven't used this brush in ages, so I'm going to give it a try. The next question is, what color should I paint the shadows? If I look at pictures of the moon's surface, the shadows tend to be really deep. Where'd my pictures of the moon's surface go? I mean, here they're kind of soft, right? Kind of shaded in, almost like they would be done with a wash. But on this one, they're really stark, really dark, high contrast. So that's the question. Am I going to try to do like shading? Am I going to do the deep shadow? I'm going to start with just the dark shadow. And like I said before, if it doesn't seem to work, I can just respray it, this color. I've got NATO black and I've got just flat black. And ordinarily I would test these like on a patch, but can't really test this because it's either going to look good or not, and a test patch isn't going to tell me. Well, actually, that would work really well. It's kind of this bluish color, sea blue. We've actually found that if one wants something to look black on screen when we've done our dungeon tiles, painting it this really dark blue color and then putting a dark wash on it actually looked better than painting it black. This NATO black is a pretty good color. The paint tends to be kind of gummy, but I'm going to give this a try. It's a little bit lighter and a slightly bluish greenish compared to just a plain flat black. This is a good low risk sort of thing to be doing because, as I said, if it doesn't work out, this is just primer. Wait for the paint to dry, spray more primer on it. I've got a great big can of it. These off so I can see up close. I'm going to go a little past 12:30 today and then just call it a day because it's Friday. You know, who doesn't want to end up early? Other than not being able to get the curve right. That look like a moon shadow? Oh, that's a song, isn't it? I'll put one here. I hope I can brush that primer on later because I got I'm getting spots of paint where I don't want them. Well, yeah, I was talking about rockets and staging, but explosive bolts Right. Let's go back to that. There was nothing cooler than explosive bolts. When we learned about explosive bolts is probably, I don't know, fourth or fifth grade or something, maybe. When would it have been? 59, 8. Yeah, it'd been like third or fourth grade or something like that. It was, we learned about explosive bolts as the way that they separated the stages, and all the all the boys that I knew, what we wanted more than anything, what we really wanted was like a couple of explosive bolts. I mean, back in the 50s, who wouldn't want one's own supply of explosive bolts? You could put things together and then make them get separated. I'm not sure if this is looking moony or if this is looking dumb. I'm not having a I'm not being able to tell if this is a good idea or whether this is a bad idea. Craters of the moon have these shadows like this. This is an experiment. And so far, I'd say the experiment is experimental, right? It's definitely experimental. So I'm going with the kind of dark shadow, kind of a grayish. It's not deep black. This brush kind of worked pretty well for this. It held together okay. It's an expensive brush, but I found that it was good for making an edge, but not very good for detailing. So what I'm going to do next is get a lighter gray color. I've got this handy. It's right here. So I'm going to use this. And what I'm going to do is, since the sun is coming from this direction, is do a lighter highlight right along the edge of the rim and then on the rim here. And then just see how it looks. I don't know how it's going to look. Find out how it looks. A couple of craters and see how they look. I don't want a lot of paint on my brush here. I'm going to start by catching the edge here. Just here as well. So I don't know what's going wrong with this. It maybe it's okay. I'm going to finish these craters. Just the ones that I've done here. Ask an opinion from an artist, Nicole, about what I'm trying to do and why I'm not succeeding, or whether I am. I mean, I might be. Say, well, the edges are too sharp, but on the other hand, when you look at moon pictures, the edges tend to be pretty stark. Something like that works better. I don't know. Like I said, I'm going to do these and then get an opinion about. Okay. But yeah, stages. Stages were really important early on because rockets weren't, well, and then became even more important later because single stage rockets just were not powerful enough, other than the Atlas initially with the Mercury program, to launch the weights necessary to get things to the moon or even in orbit. And as satellites became bigger and heavier, like as spy satellites and stuff, then borrowed military rockets, Atlases and Titans, became important launch vehicles. And then putting the Atlas Agena, basically a second stage on the Atlas, that was a big, bold move forward. Actually, and it didn't work at first. Part of it, if I recall correctly, I'm doing space age stuff here. I'm going to keep talking about that next week too. Is part of it was that, remembering correctly, that was the first time that they attempted to do a liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen fueled rocket. It was the liquid oxygen is liquid oxygen. It's the oxidizer for whatever fuel is being burned, but different fuels have different thrust to weight ratios. They have a certain weight. They weigh something, usually too much, and when they burn, maybe it depends. It produces more or less thrust, and like the perfect fuel became liquid hydrogen because hydrogen is really quite light, even in its liquid form, and it produces a lot of thrust compared to its weight. So I think that's why they had some problems with that second stage of, I think it was the Agena. But yeah, that's stages. So there's craters on the moon, some sort. I'll get an opinion about how that's looking. If it's sort of looking okay, there's a lot more craters to paint, and I could just keep doing this on Monday. There's, just to see how it looks. I think it would look better, if more of the rest of this detail had some shadowing and some highlighting on it, but I wanted to see how the craters came out. I'm going to see how this color looks. This is just flat black as opposed to the NATO black. You can always paint over it, right? I'm going to take this and I'm going to paint one of them. This one. I'll paint this one flat black. If we don't like it, I can paint over it. Do one of them in this color just to see if it looks better. I'm getting the impression that this moon base thing could take months messing around trying to make it look moony. It's not my intent, but on the other hand, it's kind of fun painting it. Let these dry. When I come down to pick that up, the command module for painting, I'll take this up and get some expert opinions about whether this has promise or not. Let's see. Yep, I'm going to just do a Dice and Dungeons promo and then wrap up for the day. Because it's Friday, I'm going to take off early, and I don't feel like painting more moon stuff until I get an opinion about whether there's any future in it or not. So I'm going to talk about our dungeon tiles. This stream started because of painting dungeon tiles for our Dungeons and Dragons show. Hi, you're coming in just in time to see the finish. Yes, doing D&D on the moon. I'll explain. This stream all started because we do a Dungeons and Dragons show and produced our own dungeon tiles for use on the show on the PLA printers back there. This is a sample of some of them. And we hand painted all of these. They're base coated and then washed to bring out, the texture and stuff, and then details are painted on. Special features like doors are added. Okay. And we painted a lot of these to begin with in order to get dungeons and warehouses and taverns and all sorts of things. And so decided to stream that painting process, and did that for a good long time until I ran out of dungeon tiles and sometimes minifigs that are used in the show that were painted on this stream. But then when there weren't any to paint, I started building models, and I did a submarine model, and now I'm getting really close to finishing the Apollo moon stack, the different components of the Apollo program. So, yeah, inconceivable that I would run out of those things to do. We ran out of things to do for the show. There's still a possibility that we could go back to. I'll just give this hint. We have talked about the possibility of maybe producing these tiles as a commercial venture. And I'll show you why, because they are so cool. So they're printed on the 3D printer. Has one solid piece, wall and floor. There are round corners, inside corners, outside corners, floor tiles. There's a wide variety of these sorts of things. but the best feature is that under this plate there are ball magnets in each corner, and so the magnets stick to each other. And so even though you could use tabs or connectors to connect these things, we found that, yeah, it worked, but it was really hard, relatively hard to pull them apart and reconnect them. So we decided on an expensive solution, which are the ball magnets, but it's really cool how, I mean, they adhere to each other. You can take them apart and reconfigure them really easily and quickly, and they hold really quite well. Okay, and you don't need any special surface or anything. Just that. So this stream actually did start as relaxing painting with Dyson Dungeons. Painted all their minis. I paint lots of minis. I'll show you some minis here. I'm sure we're going to meet this guy sometime. It's a fungus monster. Mycelium oozing up from the bottom up into this nasty creature. And then there's the standard basilisk. Always have to have a standard basilisk. You never know when you need to run into one. We've got a Quetzalcoatl. I'm hoping that if we meet this one, if we ever meet this one, that it's a friendly creature. Yeah, I know that this has a name. I can't remember what it is. It's an actual real creature sort of thing, but it's unlikely to be friendly. Anyway, I've done a lot of mini painting, and some of them are pretty cool. Like there's, we got a standard little fairy there, holding a lantern. And our own figures, the figures that represent us, are all painted like this too. And we wander through these dungeons made up of these dungeon tiles that are painted on the show. But not having these to work with at the moment, I'm relegated to building the models that I collected when I retired. And I thought that's all I would ever do is sit around and build models, because what else is there to do when you're retired? But it turned out that I never got around to it. But now I'm doing it on this show. And I'm almost done with the Apollo. And on Monday, I'll bring out... Okay. Thanks for identifying it. I was told when I was painting it what it was. Several times I was told, but remembering, if I don't write it down, it doesn't get remembered. But yeah, I'm hoping to get more minis again sometime. It's kind of fun painting those. And it's Dungeons and Dragons related, which is what Dyson Dungeons is all about, is our Dungeons and Dragons show. So it would be appropriate for that to be done. But anyway, I don't have any. We have talked about maybe making these commercially, though. Printing them and putting the magnets in. And when we talked about it, we talked about either selling them just as bare plastic, or more likely primed. Okay, prime them some color. And if someone wanted them to be hand painted, could actually, like if someone made an order for a necromancer lair, we would produce it and actually paint it right on the stream, so that whoever was purchasing it could see their dungeon being created. But we've never gotten around to that. I don't know if we will or not. In the meantime, I get to show these off and say, this is why this painting stream got started. And why am I doing the moon? Because I'm building this model. And then after I'm done with that, a little bit more apropos, at least, I'm going to be building Porco Rosso's Savoia. be working on this model next. Until I get minifigs or dungeon tiles to paint. Our D&D show streams with a live chat on Sundays at 2, and all of the previous episodes are on YouTube. I'll just leave these here. If I reach over, I'm going to knock more stuff down, and I've already knocked over enough things today. Yep, they're all on YouTube, and you can listen to them as a podcast. And I think, without bragging too much, just bragging just enough, we are really quite entertaining. It's a good show. So I'd really encourage anybody who's catching this to go on YouTube and catch one of the Dungeons and Dragons show. And if you like it, you can become a follower on Twitch. Like you could become a follower for this. Could become a YouTube subscriber, and you can even go to patreon.com/DiceandDungeons and become a patron and get access to our warm-up improvs, and more recently, our hot takes and cold reads, where we ask artificial intelligence to come up with something, and then we read it and critique it, and it's easy to critique. Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't have much else to do today. I've gotten kind of at an impasse point on the Apollo model that has to do with trying to get the detail on the control panels and the command module done. So I started working on the moon base, and I did some testing here with the sun supposedly shining from this direction. And I think maybe if I were to do like highlights all over the texture that's on the moon base, so that the rest of this wasn't just flat and the craters were standing out quite like this, that it might actually start looking okay. I'm not really sure though. So I'm going to ask Nicole, who is an artist and also plays one of the characters on our D&D show, what can be done with this within my skill level, which is pretty limited. I am going to be signing off for the day then. I want to thank everybody who joined in today and is putting up with the very, it's not slow, it's just tedious progress on the Apollo model. And hopefully looking forward to the Savoia starting up in the next week or so, depending on what I end up doing with the moon base here. And at some point in the indeterminate future, some point we'll be doing Dungeons and Dragons tiles, dungeon tiles, and or minifigs again. Looking forward to that too. So, what can I say? Relaxing Painting with Dice and Dungeons is going to take an early break on a Friday. Yay. And we'll be back on Monday. Hi. Oh, okay. You know, that's a really cool name. Okay, I'm going to have to pass that on to our German-speaking son. I could do things if I worked on this map, if I actually tried to be artistic about it. This is the landing thing for the lunar excursion module, which is actually a component of the model. It lands here, and this is supposed to be where the exhaust blew the dust out of the way. But I could do hidden things on the map. It might be if I'm relegated to working on this map as sort of pretending to be an artist. It would be fun to do some hidden things. That's a really great idea. Thank you. Schadenvergnügen. Did I say that correctly? Schadenvergnügen, with a very bad American accent. I have to admit. I learned a little bit of German. Ein bisschen, maybe even less. But yeah, and our son lives in Berlin, and get to visit him every once in a while. Although what we found in Berlin is that, as one of the Uber drivers said, there are no Germans living in Berlin. That was an exaggeration, but the neighborhoods that the neighborhood he lives in is hugely international, and it's a very fun area. So yeah, thanks for the follow. I really appreciate it. I would really like it if you guys would come back on Monday, okay? Because I'll either be working on this map, which might be kind of fun to watch if it's what I'm doing, just as you watch me struggle trying to get the shadows on the inside of the craters and the highlights right, and following the advice of our artist member. But and it just has to be. There's a lot of it. It might be kind of fun to just watch that happen next week, to see if it really looks like it's part of the moon, and we can find things to hide on the surface of the moon, like maybe evidence of alien life or something. That'd be kind of cool. And if I'm not painting the moon surface, then I'll be starting to try to figure out how to build the Savoia. The Savoia's instructions are in Japanese. It's just in Japanese, and all I've got to go on are the pictures and in the instruction manual and the cover art. There are really detailed painting instructions too, which are unintelligible. Probably related to actual colors of specific brands of paint. Like if I were to be able to translate them. Drop the whole thing. Kind of shocking today. I haven't really broken anything or dropped anything. So there's these really detailed painting instructions here. Okay. With numbers on them. And they look like I think these are brands of paint. Okay. And that these are, yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure that this is Tamiya. Pretty sure, because the Tamiya paints are either X for glossy or XF for the flats. And these must relate to, I'm not sure what they would relate to, some other brands of paint. So they're very specific in which colors of paint are supposed to be used on different parts. But I'm just sort of baffled by this. I don't know if, I think those are numbers. I'm just speculating out loud. I'm really not sure. It looks like they're specifying colors. It's like there's a lot of colors on Porco Rosso here, but I don't see that these match up to anything here. Like this is 44. Which of these is 44? I'm baffled by that. I'm not really sure how that's going to work. It's going okay. I'm looking forward to starting this next model because the Apollo is getting close to being done, or at least as close to being done as I can get it done until I get the instrument panel. But the model that I'd be building is, as you can see, the instructions are in Japanese. And as a result, I can't read them. Okay. Box numbers refer to GSI Krios as Mr. Color paint color numbers. There was actually something in English here. You know, I might try to do that in certain portions of this. There's little bits of English. Box numbers. Okay, these are these numbers. And on Porco Rosso's model, the box numbers, that was a very helpful little bit. All I have to do is find GSI Krios's Mr. Color paint colors. I can't find those paints, but at least they might tell me kind of what they are. And this might be an equivalency chart of the colors using Tamiya paints and whatever. Oh, that's the GSI. Okay. Is that what it was? I'm just flipping through this. GSI, yeah, it says GSI on here. So, there's a GSI and a Mr. Okay, so this refers to I have now figured something out. Okay, so the numbers in the boxes refer to the GSI Krios Mr. Color paint numbers, and there is just a GSI and a Mr. So there is that. And then these numbers, there's a 51, yep, and a 33, and a 2, and a 72. I have made a breakthrough in terms of color charts. Such a deal. These numbers refer to this column because these are GSI Mr. Colors. I don't know what this is. This one I'm certain is Tamiya because those are all X's and XFs, and those relate to just I'm familiar with those, so I'm pretty sure that that's what they are. So it would be possible to get this and translate, see what colors are here, and translate that into a Tamiya color. Okay. That was actually really helpful to find out because I can see what these are. Looks like I'll be buying a lot of paint. The rest of this, I'm reading about Phoebe, who is a fire talent. That's really good background. I really like you're doing a great job with your characters. If people hadn't been in chat before, can you give them a real quick overview of who Phoebe is? I'm going to try that with these instructions. I've used Google Translate a little bit now and then, just when I was traveling. We actually used it. It was pretty funny. We were in a restaurant and we were using Google Translate, and so was the server, the you know the waiter, and we that's how we had our phones out communicating back and forth that way, which was pretty fun. So okay, Phoebe is a runaway, and that's how Phoebe came in. Oh, and is an unusual character joining up with your party. That's a good backstory. Okay, so just looking at this, kind of, is this looking kind of like moon shadows, like the light coming from left to right? If that's how you're seeing it on your screen, with the shadow inside the crater and then a highlight on the outside. Do you think there's any future in doing this, or should I just give up on this and repaint it? Okay, and I'm assuming that I can do something similar with all the tiny little craters and some of these texture lines and things like that. Like this, I could paint one side of that this lighter color because the sun is catching it, and the other side darker, like a shadow. In fact, the light is coming from that direction, so it is shadowed like that. Oh, I just had a thought. I don't know if it's a good thought or not. Is I can, if this is sort of something I can be doing, is what I could do is I could actually get a light. Thanks for sharing that with everybody. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody who's watching this, even on YouTube later, at least now has some background. Did you finally decide on the last name too? So but she's also very, very susceptible to water damage too. So as a character, on one hand is almost overpowered, but on another is also very vulnerable. So what I was thinking out loud here to myself is what I could do is actually get a light. See that? I'm using the ring light up here is to actually have a light shine on this, and it would cast shadows and highlights, and I could just do like paint by numbers. I could try that. What's weird about this is I painted these this way because in this picture, the shadows were convex like that. Kind of light came from here and made a convex shadow all through these. And so I was trying to replicate that look here. But here, the shadows aren't convex. They're more like that. They're concave on the inside of the crater. And I think that actually looks. I'm going to paint one like that. I said I was going to finish early, and now I'm just ditzing around and not when I should be. I'm getting thirsty. I'm getting tired. I'm getting hungry. I'm getting grumpy. And here I am still messing around with this. I'm going to paint this one differently. I'm going to end up repriming this whole thing. Tests. And I'm testing to see how I'm going to paint this. There is a YouTube link. Dang, do I know what it is? Does it show up? I think if you look under my picture, there's like a scroll thing that shows the social media stuff. And I believe one of those is YouTube. I wish I knew these things if I remembered anybody. Remembered anything. Is who still on? Can you post the YouTube link? So Phoebe is, just for people who are paying attention to chat, is a phoenix-like creature in a sense. Yeah, there is a YouTube link, and I'm sorry, I should be versed in these things. So if someone asks, I can actually tell people. I know that if you went to our website, DysonDungeons.com, that the social media links are all there. And I think they scroll under my picture here on this stream. But I'll definitely get a cheat sheet so that I can tell people what they are. No, it's really helpful to have people talk and chat, especially when they're talking about creating their Dungeons and Dragons characters. Okay, because you've got a really clever one going there. It's not quite perfect, but I just wanted to practice these. I wanted to see how these looked if I painted the shadows differently. And I'm thinking, just from what I'm seeing now, that this is the way it needs to be done and not the way I did it at first. Really paying attention to what I'm doing. Well, Phoebe from Pyraxis is the hero character that you developed for yourself, and now you've created an even better backstory. That's really good. Have you thought more about how you're going to disguise her extra arms? I know that was an issue when we chatted before, is what do you do about those? Because, supposed to be blending in, right? Okay. Now I've got some practice ones. Yeah, I know that it's really. Thank you. I'm glad you found it. Well, you really need to like your character, and in order to play it well in a D&D game, or especially on a show, where you almost like I try to become my character on the show. In that really makes a difference, and I think it makes gameplay a lot more fun when you're playing it as your character and not just a player playing. So what you're doing with Phoebe and coming up with this, you don't have to share your entire elaborate backstory at once. It can come out little bits at a time, and sometimes pieces of it don't ever come out. Yeah, put your extra arms in the craters. But I think that, if I'm going to show this to our resident artist, but I'm thinking that this configuration of shadows and highlights works better than this. So even though a picture of the moon shows the shadows as being convex like that, and this one shows them as being concave, that it works better this way. I think this bright spot should go down into the crater just a little bit deeper, though. I don't know why I'm messing with this right now, because it'll all have to be redone anyway. But we are like cleaning brushes. But I'm definitely going to have to hide some stuff in the moon if I paint this. If I take the time to paint it, there's going to have to be like the equivalent of hidden Mickeys at Disney World, kind of. Okay. Yeah, I said I was going to shut down like a half an hour ago, and then I didn't. I just kept going because I wanted to test this versus this. And I fortunately left the primer upstairs anyway, near the well-ventilated area where it will be reused, so I can just redo this. Because this looks doofus and this looks better. So she's been found out already, huh? Well, I know she liked to crunch on charcoal. So did she bring the food with her? Or is she learning how to make these things on Earth? Because, unless she's eating at very authentic Thai restaurants, she's not going to be getting the heat that she would want otherwise. For a response. And we'll chat about that just a little bit. And then I am going to have to wrap up for the day and say I'll see you all on Monday at about 10, at which time I will be doing one of several things depending on how stuff goes. Okay. I'll be installing Apollo command module windows. I might just start plugging away at the moon base. The more I'm doing this, the more I'm kind of liking it. I'm thinking that this might be an okay thing to do. Okay. So you're just getting started. Well, I'm going to hope that you come back on Monday, because I want to hear more about how Phoebe is coming along. And I want to also thank Shadnis Vernugan for the follow, and I hope you come back next week as well. I'll be talking more about Dice and Dungeons and our Dungeons and Dragons show, and I'll also be working on something, either the moon or something with the Savoya, or just trying stuff that doesn't work and complaining about it, which is become a sort of a regular feature of the show. So thanks, everybody, and I hope to see you all, and even yet more people, on Monday at about 10 on Relaxing Painting with Dice and Dungeons. Be sure to catch our Dungeons and Dragons show. Please do that. See you all later.